To the April regular meeting of the Maritime Advisory Board of the City of Annapolis. My name is Terry Lomax. I am the chair. And as I usually do, I just go around my screen, so there's no particular order as to who we have on as panelists. We have Alan Miller, a board member. We have Andy Fagley, a board member. We have Beth Bellis, the harbor master. We have Mike Tomasini, a vice chair and board member. We have Alderman Arnett from Ward 8. We have Rick Nelson, a board member. We have Debbie Goslin, a panelist and former board member, but is a welcome addition. Scott Allen, a board member. Jake Iverson from Watermark, also a welcome addition. Josh from, is it Durant? From COA TV. Hope Stewart from the city, and Kimberly Consoli, our recorder. I think I've got everybody. So with that, we do have a quorum. We can just get started with the approval of the minutes from the March meeting. If everybody has had an opportunity to take a look, I didn't have any suggested changes. Does anybody have any suggested changes?
Hey, Terry, just one question. I know we had discussed the Harbor Masters building and the kind of the moving of Beth to temporary quarters. It's not reflected in the minutes. Of course, it may be a moot point now. I think the building's been taken down, if I'm not mistaken. But
I think that we did discuss it, and Beth, was it in your report last week or last month that you had already moved?
You're on mute. You're on mute, Beth.
Sorry, I'm not sure what was in my last report. I can tell the group that we moved to 4 Dock Street. The teams worked very hard and we're comfortable and functional and we're good to go.
So the in terms of the minutes, is that a motion to amend it, or do we? I think you're right. We did discuss it, and you had already moved as of the last meeting, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, that was addressed under new business under the subtitle of construction for City Dock.
Ah, there you go. So new business.
Item 3A.
Yep. Harbor Master staff have moved to 4 Dock Street. So there's the answer to your question, Rick.
excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. All right, any other suggested changes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes from March meeting? Somebody has, but Mr. Allen has moved. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Fagley. Mr. Tomasini beat Mr. Fagley. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Kimberly, that was unanimous. Any opposed? Hearing none, unanimous. Okay.
Harry, just real quick, I just got back from Mr. Weaver. He is unable to attend tonight, but so long as he gets informed for the next meeting, he'd like to attend in June. I mean, in May.
Hope, can you make sure he gets on the list?
Yes, if somebody can send me his email address, I will definitely make sure that our newest member is a part of our board.
As a member.
Yes, can participate.
All right, I just
All right,
made a
I'm
note.
sending it now.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Mike.
Scott, you want to give us a update on the MIAB meeting? And before you do, I did talk to Matt Fleming, who you're going to mention, and he's going to join us in our May meeting. So with that, you can go ahead and fill us in.
Excellent. The MIAB meeting was on March 24th, so a little while ago. And I'll read just a summary from their minutes that covers the main things, and I'll fill in a few things. And from their minutes, it says the meeting covered coastal restoration work at Carr's Beach and discussed the role and projects of the Resilience Authority for Anne Arundel County and Annapolis. Updates were provided on various initiatives, including the shrink wrap recycling program, sea level rise vulnerability assessments, and flooding prevention efforts. The group also discussed upcoming boat shows, and agreed to reconvene for further updates on sea level rise and other projects. That's sort of the broad sweep of it. And the usual members were there: Hamilton Cheney running it, Rod Jabin, Mary Ewenson, Karen Kirk, Dick Schwenk, who is not an official member, as well as Eric Friend, a staff member, and Jenny Mininger, and Jesse Iliff, who I don't think is a member, but he's Severn River Association, so he was there. But it was quite interesting after going over the shrink wrap recycle program and also the Annapolis City Dock project. There were questions of where it was, and that I don't know. On the 24th, the building was coming down or still up, but it was right there, ready to come down on the 24th of March. And they talked about the restoration project at Carr's Beach, which is in the county, and the road there. I think Rod Jabin was interested in how they were going to handle traffic and things going in there across Stearns Marina. And they talked about the road responsibility, and Ross probably knows more than I do, but the road, I think, is managed by the county. Ross may have an idea on that better than I do, but anyway, there was some talk about how the traffic could be handled on that. But the main thrust of the meeting was the visit by Matt Fleming, who is an expert in resiliency, and some of you may know him. And he is for the county and also the city, which I didn't realize. But there's the Resilience Authority for Anne Arundel County and for Annapolis. And I didn't know there was one for Annapolis per se, but he is quite up on all things waterfront and talked for about 40 minutes, and with slideshow, everything. It was very interesting. And he knows almost to the inch the height of the rise of waters and various storms and around the academy at various places, and said that exactly when the high water mark will be up 2 feet, and I think he said 2050. He's projected and done a lot of studying on this, so it's quite interesting, as well as getting grants for initiatives and other assessments and flood prevention efforts. And so I think some of you probably know him through Annapolis, but one of his questions was, and there weren't answers, there are apparently some sea level monitors, automatic monitors with readouts going places, and there were not many in Annapolis. So that's just one thing that he was talking about, maybe an initiative to get more in Annapolis to watch the sea rise in various places. And, but I had mentioned this to Terry, and so Terry, I didn't realize until I saw the agenda that he could be here in May, but I suggested he do it because it was quite interesting, and it would be good for especially all of us in Annapolis that have maritime interests. So that was most of the discussion was, and took most of their time in the evening, which is a little earlier than ours. They go from 5 to 6. And they did have the discussion of the City Dock project and the status, but that was 3 weeks old. And also the Annapolis Emergency Management Policy and System, and through the Public Works Department, in case that's ever needed. And then they talked about the boat shows, and Mary was talking about the various boat shows and how they had to move, and where they are over in the Eastern Shore. So one of them has passed, and I guess the sailboat show is moving up Eagle Alley, farther up Eagle Alley, and Beth can probably tell us more, but that she just gave a summary of it. But the spring sailboat show is going to be right up by Chop Tank Restaurant, up in that area, rather than farther down the city dock. Anyway, but that was about it. Just wanted to report that. It was a not as detailed a meeting as we have in our subjects, but the little broader sweeps there. But I thought that one for the resiliency is very appropriate for this time with the various things along the city dock and town and the tide rises. So. You're mute, Terry.
Right. Matt has agreed to come to our meeting in May. And so hopefully we'll get enlightened by him as the county was enlightened by him. I did not speak with him, but I did email with him, got an introduction through Eileen Fogarty. And so he's acknowledged that he would like to be here in May. I'll have to give you, give you his contact, although you may have it.
I think I may have it. I'd have to look and see if it was in their minutes or anything.
So Beth, I saw a note about asking to have Jackie Guild added. I don't have an email address for her, but Josh might be able to send her a.
Yeah, so I sent it. It's jsguild@annapolis.gov. I sent it to you and I sent it to Josh.
Okay,
I know she's trying to get in.
Josh, if you could send that link to her, I'd appreciate it, or hope you can. Well, I hope you probably have it too.
Yeah, I can send it to her too.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll pass on economic development update until Hope is done doing her texting. Let's switch to let's just move down to the public water access plan. Beth or Rossi, is there any update on where that is at the moment?
I have nothing.
You're on mute, Beth.
Sorry, I think the update is that everything is go ahead for Hawkins Cove, and I think there's all good news there. We had a short meeting with the engineer, Mike Rosberg, about Hawkins Cove, and so I'm sure there's many things we could talk about as it pertains to water access, but I think Hawkins Cove is probably like the biggest news, and everything is moving forward in a positive direction.
You gave an update on that in your monthly report that I saw this morning, which then segues kind of into that report. And I have read it through it and didn't have any particular questions, except on your marina summary, you have listed three public marinas. And I wonder why the crab facility and Annapolis Maritime Museum are listed as public marinas because they're not open to the public per se. And I know Annapolis Maritime Museum, you have to be a member at some level in order to dock there. And I don't think crab is open to public docking.
I guess I'd have to drill down on their leases. So if we got that wrong, that's our fault. But I would have to drill down on those leases with the Office of Law. I'm not sure I understand all of the nitty-gritty with those leases. And so if we got that wrong, we'll correct it.
And I bring it up because if somebody is reading it and sees that it's a public marina, I don't want all of a sudden people showing up saying, "Oh, the city said it's a public marina. Why can't I tie up?"
I mean, I think you're allowed to go to the Maritime Museum and dock up and walk around, but I could be wrong. I will look at those leases and I will figure that out.
Okay, I'd appreciate it because I know for the Maritime Museum, because I'm a member, there's some level that you get free dockage. As a member, you're at some level, but I don't think it's just, come visit and tie up while you're visiting. I think it's more, you have to be.
Yeah, I think we sort of thought of that as like, as opposed to private, but there might be something in the middle between private and public, and maybe we need to reclassify that. But thank you for pointing that out. We'll try to fix that.
And by the way, your audio is much improved. I don't know if you got a new computer or what?
I moved. I'm in a new home.
Oh, well, your Wi-Fi service,
Yeah.
is much better. I can have to tell you.
Yeah, I'm in a new home, so hopefully that's the reason.
It's crystal clear.
Terry, can I mention there's some sensitivity about crab because it used Project Open Space money, and some are arguing therefore the slip should be open to public use. And Crab is being very protective of that and trying not to allow public use. So poking around there can raise some hackles in various places.
Well, besides just the use, that I guess that also brings into insurance issues and everything else.
Yeah. So, I think Crab thinks they're not public access. The city attorney and whoever is complaining about Crab, I think there's a next door neighbor who continues to complain about Crab. And so it's kind of an open sore that has not been resolved in any way, as far as I know.
I'm wondering where, other than spending the night, from a weather perspective, where you would go if you tied up there.
Yeah.
Other than to visit Rick down the road.
Right.
Yes, come say hi.
But it's a long walk to the Giant. All right, does anybody else have any questions about Beth's report this month? All right.
Hold on, Terry. I did want to say I was going to send Beth an email, but I'm lacking some of the intelligence on the naming of certain marinas. There are a couple that are missing on the report, so I was just going to send those to you. One, I'm a slip holder at, so I should know the name of it, but it's owned by the same person who owns the Blue Heron Marina at the back of Back Creek. There's a small marina in between the Eastport Yacht Center and the J World facility. Is owned by the same person. It's at 716 Second Street, and I think he calls that also Blue Heron Marina. It's a single dock, but it should be added to the list.
Is that Steve Rogers? Is that one
Yeah,
of
that's
Steve
Steve Rogers. Yep, 716 Second, and then also directly across from it on the Bemby Beach side, there's a marina. I think it's called Port Williams. Does that ring a bell? Rick, it's down by you. It's in between you and Annapolis.
That became Crab.
That became Crab.
Is
Yeah.
that all part of Crab?
Yeah, Crab bought Port Williams. That's correct.
Got it. And then what's then there's that small low piece of property that just has another single pier where the pilot boats used to dock.
Yeah, that's Steve Bemby's property, but that's just a private dock.
Just a
he
private
now,
dock, not a marina.
Yeah, he now takes people out to ships that are anchored out in the bay, but it's not a public dock.
All right, and then the third one is across from the Eastport Democratic Club in the corner there. There's a privately run marina behind a residence. It's I don't know, it's probably not more than 18 slips or so.
It's owned by Dean Slaughter.
I couldn't remember the name of it.
Yeah, for sure, Mike. We know we don't have it perfect. So if you would send me those edits, I would be very grateful.
Yeah, I was just hopeful.
And I will add it.
know that. Mike, do you know the name of that marina, Ross? What they call it?
No, Bill Reichert keeps his boat there. Dean Slaughter owns it, and they want a houseboat there.
All right, I'll look it up, Beth, and I'll get it. I just figured maybe the group would be able to give me the intel, which they did on Port Williams, which is good.
Yeah, thank you. I'll look for your email. I appreciate it.
Yes, Andy.
The name will come to me. I know what it's called, but I have to work through my file cabinet.
Yeah, when you get to the right section, Andy, just blurt it out, and I'll put it in the email to Beth.
All right, anything else on the Harbor Master's report? Hope, if you're back, you can give us an economic development update.
I am, and I sent the email link to Jackie Gild. I couldn't add her to the calendar invite, but I sent her the link.
Okay.
So for the economic development update, the small Maritime Business Task Force, Seth Lehner presented to the Rules and City Government Committee on April 4th, and Alderman Arnett was there. And I think the next step now is that the city clerk's office is going to organize a work session of the city council so that he can present to everybody. I don't have a date for that yet, but that is the next step. I don't know if Alderman Arnett has anything to add to that.
I do.
Great.
So I'll ask Terry and other members of the 2021 Maritime Task Force. If you recall some facts, or to recall some facts. First of all, towards the end of that meeting, Phil Dales tried to put in some amendments to the task force report. It was resisted by Eileen Fogarty and I believe the task force members. And so then Amendment 19 to the final ordinance was put forth by Alderwoman Finlayson. I co-signed it because I wanted to stay on top of it. But the thesis of the small marinas in the WME is that they were not treated fairly by the task force. I know Eileen Fogarty feels very much that they were, but she's only one person. So a question I would put to those that were on the task force is, does that square with your recollection of how the WME marinas and WMM, but really WME, were they considered by the task force in your recollection and not given triggers?
The issue became, my recollection is that the issue became that the triggers that were being proposed was not a one size fits all. And the main impetus for amendments, I believe, had to do mostly with WME and had to do with the size of restaurants. And rather than that was a much debated topic, and there wasn't a consensus on opening up 4,000 square foot restaurants in the Maritime and Eastport, but there was a recognition that there were some small businesses that were not either immediately on the water or were of such a small size or relatively small size that they could not afford themselves of any of the triggers that were being either in existence or were being proposed. And so the amendment was to address that aspect of, and that's, I think it's why it's called the small business work group or something like that, was to see if we could come up with a consensus on how to help address the small businesses who were, I won't say left out, but weren't eligible in most cases for the triggers that were in 025, 21.
All right, well, that squares with my recollection, but and particularly the 4,000 foot restaurants, which would be larger than the current boatyard and boatyard market. And so it's hard to figure out where exactly you would fit in any of the smaller WME marinas, a restaurant that large. But I can tell you there will be very strong resistance to that from the Ward 8 residents. And I would say the current Ward 8 alderperson. We passed the outdoor dining legislation last night at City Council, and there's now going to be outdoor dining for up to 9 months, and there's going to be more pressures on parking. Alderman Savage has said that he is going to introduce legislation to remove the requirement for parking from restaurants, which could be quite a disaster in Ward 8. Ward 8 is singular because it is largely residential, but it does have a lot of marinas, small and old marinas that have existed for a long time, certainly well before Eastport became gentrified and populated, but they are in the middle of neighborhoods. Ward 2 is the only other ward that has restaurants with private parking, but none of those restaurants have chosen to do it. So it isn't putting parking pressure on Ward 2 like it would put on Ward 8. So at the presentation before the city council, and I don't know whether you have those materials, they're available online. There was a PowerPoint presentation given by Seth, and then a handout, and it has in there a set of suggested triggers which parallel the triggers for the large marinas, but are much easier to trigger because they're designed to make it available to small marinas. And Mike, you, I think, worked closely with Seth in developing this report. I keep asking the question, what's in it for Ward 8? And what's in it for Maritime? The thrust of their triggers is that it can be up to 35% non-maritime and add a lot of restaurants, which will be at marinas that are also used by recreational boaters and racers. And the parking for the restaurants is going to strongly compete with parking to get on the boats to race and parking. Like I always kept my boats at Muller's, which had no parking. So whenever I use my boats or race my boats, I would be parking on the street. North Sales does not have enough parking for all the people that both have recreational slips and also um, race out of there. And I know that Holly is very interested in having a restaurant. And I know that Brett Anderson is very interested in having a big restaurant at South Annapolis Yachting Center. And so is Dan Price at Eastport Yachting Center. Uh, and I just cannot figure out how those restaurants will be compatible with maritime and the parking requirements. And so I've asked the staff to look up each of the marinas and tell me what their maritime parking requirements are and whether they are even meeting that, which I know some of them are not, before we start talking about adding 4,000 foot restaurants. But I will guarantee you that there will be as strong a reaction from Ward 8 residents to this as there has been so far to adding houseboats in the marinas. But I'm giving you my unvarnished opinion. Mike is here and worked with that, and I guess it's on the agenda on a couple of different places. So I'd be interested in, yeah, it's item D, hearing because Mike is also the president of the Eastport Business Association and therefore, um, is representative of business interests. How you think I should be reacting to this? I can tell you it's not well, but and it's getting worse. But uh, what is it that you see is in it for Ward 8 residents, Mike?
Well, if I pick up where you started, and I think Terry hit on it a little bit, in the task force 2020 into 2021, when we were talking about maritime zoning, the WME properties and how to help them get any kind of flexibility was it was a struggle. Because of the size of some of the parcels, because some of the parcels like Scott's old sail loft were landlocked, so they weren't going to have a travel lift or even a crane to pick up boats and store them on land. And there was a lot of participation from a lot of different groups in that task force. Everybody was represented, including the residents, and I think the residents were pushing strongly back against large increases in flexibility for all of the zones, and particularly the WME because they surrounded those properties and they didn't want to see the maritime in those places turn over into restaurants unless there was some kind of community good. So it's largely where the incentives portion of the of the legislation came out, right? You were not going to qualify for a trigger. So if there was a way for you to achieve some kind of flexibility, it would be by, taking up one of the incentives that was listed. And some of the incentives are also really hard to, what was the word you used, Terry? To be eligible for, right? Some of these smaller, Weems and Plath next to me, they're never going to be able to provide 200 parking spaces for the public. That's not a possibility. Nor will they invest $150,000 towards a street end park. It just, the math doesn't work. So I think they were kept purposely high because the residents were concerned about easing the maritime. And I don't think that the residents were wrong. I just think that it happened to, not that it negatively affected the WME, but the other zones were given greater flexibility than what the WME, and I see Debbie shaking her head. So yeah,
WMI got nothing also on the other side of Back Creek.
What do you mean?
well, you got the 15% if you had a trigger.
You got all those triggers?
5%
No,
from the trigger.
Well, so
or is it 15% for the triggers across all the zones? If you had a trigger, you got an automatic 15%. So if you were 0,
I think
you went to
that's
15.
I have not reviewed it in a long time, but that's not my recollection. What I recall we could get was 5% more, which was nothing, not helpful.
so. Terry, on the agenda last time, I brought it up, and I don't see it on the agenda this time. I am willing to concede that maritime businesses are low return. And one of the things that I thought of, instead of essentially getting rid of maritime to save the maritime, which is what the ordinance 02521 did, and I was not in favor of that until you added that reporting criteria so we could actually see the impact of the legislation. We've never gotten the reports, and certainly not anything that would allow us to monitor all of the marinas and monitor them over time. As far as I know, the only marina that took advantage of that maritime ordinance is Annapolis City Marina to put address using the trigger, which was the gasoline station, to put a dress shop in and increase their maritime, decrease their maritime use and increase their non-maritime use. The side impact of that is Jackie Rouse kicked 55 people out of the structured parking there, 30 from the Annapolis Yacht Club and 25 from the boat yard. And I've asked and asked and asked. I know of no one, doesn't mean there isn't any, who's ever gone to the dress shop. So, but we don't really know yet any impacts. Debbie is saying, and I think she's right, that it was by design going to be hard to take advantage of the triggers because they are maritime zones and we want them to remain maritime zones. Now, as I said at the meeting at Rules, and I said at our last meeting here of the Maritime, if small marinas are in distress, there may well be other ways that we can address that distress through tax relief and things of that nature. We talked about the maritime business districts or set asides. I have not done anything. I don't know whether you had a chance to look at that, Terry, but it is true that if we preserve the marinas and they all go out of business, we haven't really preserved maritime. But putting 4,000 square foot restaurants in an already oversubscribed, we have 19 restaurants in Ward 8, the second most in the city. Ward 1 has 77, but it has a much greater impact. We do not have public structured parking in Ward 8, and we have 40% of the people who live in homes do not have off-street parking. So, and of course, there's the traffic and the inevitable speeding that impacts the ward. And I would argue that we're a wonderful ward and we're a singular ward. And one of the things that makes it especially appealing is that we're bounded by water, and those waters are populated by boats bobbing up and down and masts swaying back and forth, which makes for a very appealing lifestyle. I can look out my windows and see Safe Harbor and the Back Creek vista, and I'm trying to figure out, other than it will put more money in the pockets of some of the WME marina holders, what is the community benefit? And what is the benefit to preserving maritime? Because the proposal is with these triggers having up to 35%. That's much bigger than the big marinas got in the ordinance, being non-maritime business. And there's no indication, and maybe the marine owners don't know, of what the nature of those non-maritime businesses are going to be. Are they going to be community serving businesses, non-maritime businesses, or is it just going to go to the highest bidder who will pull in traffic and take up parking? So this may well go to a work session, but I made the appeal to my colleagues on the council that, unlike what they gave me for outdoor dining, I really do want automatic consideration on this. It doesn't affect any other ward, and WME is solely in Ward 8. And I think that we need to be having, and I told this to when they reported to us in January, I said, fairness is an equal opportunity word, and it might be fairness to the small marinas, but it needs to be fair to everybody else too. And we need to understand what it is that the community gets other than more traffic and less boat slips. And I'm talking about houseboats not here as well. But I reported at the ECA membership meeting last week, Ward 8 is really under attack. And we're under attack from the water. And we're under attack because of the houseboat issue, which is still looming large. And now the small marina issue where they want to pack in maybe as many as 5 more big restaurants. And I can't even figure out what the economics is. If you added 5 more or 4 or 3 or 2 more boat yards, where are the customers coming from? And more importantly, where are they parking? And so, I obviously I'm expressing some pretty strong opinions here, but I think this is not something that I'm receiving warmly, nor is it something that the residents of the ward, of which Frida is one, are feeling particularly good about, and or feeling that there's anything in it for us. And in fact, quite the opposite, that there's a lot of negatives for us with moving forward with this.
So Mike, how did the 35% number come about? Because it strikes me as that's 1/3 of the building becoming non-maritime, whether it be a restaurant or whether it be a doctor's office or whether it be a brokerage firm. But how did that 35% number come about?
I don't know. I haven't seen the final report that Seth presented. I'm gonna guess that it came from Seth. The task force. Hope, are you able to comment on this?
Yeah.
I mean, we had 3 meetings as a task force to discuss, largely, just what the effects were of the zoning on small maritime businesses, and that included small marinas. Seth was largely the most vocal, and yeah, I don't remember the group making any kind of numbers recommendations, anything specific, or any specific changes to the zoning as a
Yeah, it
group.
was a calculation that Seth Lehner came up with. To be honest, we weren't given a huge amount of guidance as to what this group, the composition, the direction. It was very general when we put it together. So we wanted to make sure that the group represented small maritime businesses from every maritime district in the city. And the consensus was, that most people didn't feel that they'd been impacted The only one who felt he'd been strongly impacted was Seth in the WME district. So he was the one who really took the lead on the recommendations, and then everybody else kind of concurred with him. So he was the one who did come up with the calculations, and I'm happy to send you all the documents, or, we can have him come to speak at a future meeting, or if there is a work session where he presents, or, he did present at the Rules Committee meeting, so that would, walk you through his presentation as well.
Hope it might be helpful if you would at least send that information to the board, the members of the board. I have not seen the report. This is the first I'm hearing of the recommendation, the 35%, for example. It's like Ross. I mean, it strikes me as a very substantial alteration of the makeup of the maritime zones, and particularly if it becomes, if that 35% becomes a 4,000 square foot restaurant. Like Frida, like Mike, I live in Eastport, and while I enjoy a number of restaurants, I'm not sure how many times I can go out to 21 or 23 restaurants as opposed to 19. I'm going to ask Ross where the 19 are, because in my head I couldn't come up with
I can
19.
send you a list. I have it from the city. And I actually think there might be a couple missing from that list. I just haven't had a chance to verify it. In the good old days when there were yellow pages, I would just open it and look at it.
But
Now we don't have that.
I do think that the idea that restaurants are the savior of marinas is just misguided. Forgetting about, Ross, your concerns about kind of parking and overpopulation of restaurants, it just seems counter to it. I think your idea in terms of tax abatements or subsidies has merit. I would just note that in New York City, they really wanted to keep the meat packing industry in the meat packing district, which was in West Greenwich Village, and is very expensive. And the city came up with some plan so that there are trucks that are still doing meat packing in that area, and to preserve the character. Not that that's necessarily the model, but I think, as you saw from the reaction of marinas and to the kind of approval of the amendments to WMI, no one, at least on Back Creek, is taking advantage of putting up a restaurant because it's not really consistent with their businesses. So something else needs to be done.
It reminds me of a saying that came out of the Vietnam War. We had to destroy the village to save it. We're trying to save maritime by making it non-maritime. It doesn't make sense to me. But I also strongly agree with you, Rick. If there are things we can do, and particularly, I mean, I haven't seen any demonstration of marinas going out of business or even a lot of sales. And in a previous meeting, Hope reported the vacancy rates in the maritime. They're extremely low, 0.8%. So, but that does not mean that there aren't things that we could do to make it better for all the marinas. In fact, I would think, particularly Debbie, your comment that it didn't do much for the marina that you owned. I think that's true. And actually will admit that I'm quite happy to not see marinas turned and maritime zones being turned into non-maritime. But that doesn't mean there isn't something, and this body, I think, is exactly the right body to think about what can we do to retain the maritime in the city. Already we're having a harder and harder time to get work done on our boats. We have to go across the bay or down to Deal or whatever. I talked to Rod Jabin about restaurants because he has that little deli there. And I was talking to him about making the very point you were making. Restaurant is only slightly less marginal than maritime, and they come and they go. Now, Annapolis is amazing in the number of restaurants we have that are really long lived. I think of now I'm blanking on it, the French restaurant on Main Street, and Chicken Ruth in Cafe Normandy, Chicken Ruth. There's a lot of restaurants in Annapolis that are long lived, but that is not the case in Washington. In fact, none of the restaurants I went to when I was living on Capitol Hill are still in business. They turn over quickly. There's a lot of that going on over in Ward 2. Agave's gone, Flamont has changed hands. So, it's almost like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, putting this big restaurant in an area that is already very highly concentrated with restaurants and expect to do better. But anyway, the bottom line is that I think we need to have a lot more information, first of all, about the last legislation we passed. But secondly, if Seth wants to show us his ledger, and I'm not saying we have the right to ask that, and show how poorly he's doing, or Alsop wants to show us, the North Sales is not really drawing in, and the slip rates, by the way, are steadily going up. I mean, it's very hard to find a slip for under $10,000 anywhere anymore. So, and I think that is because of economic pressures, but also because what the market will bear. So before we fix the problem, I think we have to have a much better idea of what is the problem.
One of the things that I had suggested a long time ago, and this discussion has been perennial, was allowing non-maritime to fill existing space and maintain the bulk and scale and height requirements. I think that most people don't really care what's happening in the buildings as long as it doesn't increase parking or the scale of the building, right? So if you've got an attorney in a building as opposed to a sailmaker, I don't think people really care about that. But as long as you maintain the look and feel, just like sort of the Historic Preservation Commission does in downtown, but allow landlords to get other tenants that aren't maritime because they are hard to find, that is something that would have helped us at ALM.
And that's fine. And I think that is something that we may well need to go back and revisit the whole maritime picture again. But to focus on these small marinas. Now, a couple of points that Seth made at the presentation, I really took to heart. And in fact, Scott, I mentioned your building and how hard it is when you're not on the water. And so I think that and also Seth mentioned residences, I think on Eastern Avenue, there by Wild Thing, are in the Maritime District. Residents don't belong in the Maritime District and are prohibited in the Maritime District. So I don't know how those lines got drawn. We can ask Eileen Fogarty because she's the one that did it and she's still here. So we can say, why did you include those townhouses on Eastern Avenue? And, to some extent, I think you're right, Debbie. But on the other hand, if those buildings are filled with maritime services, I think that some of us do care about what's in the building. But the 2521 definitely did not allow the building, the square footage to increase. It was geared to allowing non-maritime uses in existing footprint. So anyway, I've taken up a lot of your time, but this is a very great concern to me and to the community. And to the extent that I can have a hand in it. By the way, I mentioned to Chris Jakubiak when he picked the committee, I said, what do you think is going to happen when you make up a committee solely of small marina owners? Do you think that that is a well-rounded, fulsome information gathering? Or do you think maybe they're going to come back with recommendations that are very self-serving? And I think that's, in fact, what we've gotten is recommendations that are very specific to the interests of some small marina owners.
Hey, Alderman Arnett, I just wanted to add in, the group was not small marina owners. We wanted to make sure that the group represented a variety of businesses. That's why we had charters, we had services. It wasn't just the small marina owners. But unfortunately, what came out of it was the others were a little indifferent to the legislation because it didn't impact them. So they didn't really have a lot to contribute. And that's why the people who are more passionate about it were the small marina owners. So we did try to make it a variety of businesses, but this is just the way it worked out.
Yeah,
That's
I
what-
understand.
That's
They-
100% accurate, Hope.
Yeah,
It's really-
they didn't
it's-
show
and
up.
not necessarily an indifference, but just, there was a lack of participation from those that felt either the zoning in 2021 affected them negatively, so they didn't really have a motivation to speak out. And the question is, Ross, and the question that you probably could be asking is, well, what if we changed it to what was recommended at Rules Committee? Would you then want to say something? Because I think the participation wasn't there in the drafting of any kind of formal recommendations out of the committee, out of the task force. So if those were presented to the people that were on the committee, or to people like Jake, or to people like Andy, who have been in the industry and benefited probably greatly from maritime zoning, giving access to office space on and around the water, they might feel differently if they thought it was going to change drastically. So,
So
there's a lot to unpack.
So let
I
me
want to
ask.
challenge your premise because these small marinas were not affected negatively. They were just not affected by the legislation. But the sense that I get when they present is that somehow they were treated unfairly. Somehow they weren't given what everyone else has been given. As far as I can tell, everyone else really is one Annapolis City Marina. No one else has taken advantage of the ordinance 02521, but it didn't affect them negatively. It just didn't address them in a positive, give them more money, less maritime. And so, but that is the sense I get. And as what Seth said in the very first meeting with the Rules Committee is, they were treated unfairly. Now, they weren't treated unfairly. They were left alone. Now, I mean, obviously, it's his desire, and maybe some of the others, marina owners, to have something done to improve their economics, and I'm more than willing to do that, but not 4,000 square foot restaurants, and not dramatically decreasing the amount of maritime that's going on. And by the way, let's be honest, every one of these marinas has non-maritime businesses in them. Horn Point Marina has a hydraulic hose manufacturer, and when I question that, well, it is true that hydraulic hoses are used on some of the big boats, the race boats, but that manufacturer has most of their business is not going to the marine industry. There was an environmental attorney in Eastport Yachting Center for a number of years with an office on the second floor. It's not maritime unless you're saying, well, it has to do with the weather. So, I think that if we open the store, then we're really going to want to look at what's going on in the marinas, and I'm not sure how well that turns out.
So that actually leads to two observations. Well, actually, one observation and one question. I think part of the difficulty in getting accurate reporting is the fear of exposing yourself to having tenants who you have a lease with being kicked out because they don't comply. So there's a certain I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't aspect of that. But I also have a question of Hope and maybe Mike. When you say that there was a lack of strong interest on the non-marina members of the committee to, for lack of a better word, take a stand. Did they not understand that a 4,000 square foot restaurant in most of the small marinas in Eastport in WME would displace anywhere from probably 30 to 50% of the tenants in there? I mean, it seems that they would wonder where they would go if a restaurant comes in. The other aspect, and that's a question, but the other aspect, and I'll make a comment, then I'll let you answer, is once you put in a restaurant with the infrastructure of a restaurant, it is going to be extremely difficult when that restaurant goes out of business to reconvert that back to something other than a restaurant. It's going to sit as vacant space until they find another restaurant. And so I do have concern that you put a 4,000 square foot restaurant in, you are going to be basically forever limiting that space to a non-maritime restaurant or somewhat similar use, just because of the way the infrastructure goes in for a restaurant. But was there a question? I'll get to you in a minute, Scott. I just want to hear whether Mike or Hope have any thoughts on the fact that somebody's going to get displaced with a 4,000 square foot restaurant, or 35% non-maritime. Somebody gets displaced.
Well, I think the issue right now, I guess you would need them to speak, or maybe Mike can speak to it. But the discussions were not about restaurants. It wasn't about restaurants. It was about the waterfront incentives and, what might need to be changed to both update the code and allow more flexibility for waterfront incentives. And I'm not speaking on their behalf. I just know that Seth's point when he talked about unfairness was it made their marinas less competitive than other marinas. Also, nobody spoke about displacement because the focus was more about vacancy. So nobody talked about, well, if we'd allow this, then we'll kick all of our tenants out. That wasn't an issue that came up. And the focus of the discussion was never on the subject of restaurants, but I'll turn it over to Mike.
Yeah, you're on it, Hope. And also there wasn't any specific talk about thresholds or which things. There was theoretical talk amongst a small group of people about what other triggers could be considered for these smaller properties, or what other incentives could be added to the list for small bits of flexibility that made more sense for them and would encourage them to give something back to the community, right? So if you're only going to, if you have a small property and you're only going to get 5% more flexibility by adding a water taxi stop at your marina, then you might not do it because of any kind of liability that's associated with it, or any kind of cost of converting a fixed dock to a floating dock. You wouldn't participate because 5% in a 10,000 square foot property wasn't really going to get you all that much. So then the community misses out on that. So the largely the theoretical discussions, and it was months ago, so I don't remember all of them, but they are recorded. So anybody can go back and watch them. The theoretical discussions were, is there some kind of right sizing to the waterfront incentives that would encourage a small marina property owner in the WME to participate and to get some flexibility out of it without having to do a big lift, 150 parking spaces, or whatever is the thing. And from the original task force, this is what I remember. Residents and largely the industry, the marine trades, was against any kinds of increases in flexibility. That they, so they wanted those incentives to be a hard nut to grab at. But the question is, if you're a WME property owner, you're seeing WMM properties may have gotten flexibility, and like Hope said, the gripe is that made you less competitive with the other property owners.
If I might just say, I was just an observer in terms of the modifications, but it seemed to me that the large marinas didn't really get much out of it at all. So what the small marinas are upset about is that it was kind of
Same
a,
across the board.
it was a nothing burger, right? And then I just, a question is, listening to Ross, and it is charming having the boats and being able to look at it. Is our intent that we want to look like a maritime industry or to support the maritime industry? And because it could be that the maritime businesses effectively, because it's so constrained as to what marinas can rent to, probably get lower rent than they would otherwise. So they're being subsidized by the marinas, but it doesn't sound like the industry itself, whether it's, sailmakers or, supply chandlers, things such as that, are taking advantage of even these lower rents. And so I think a fundamental question is kind of, are we supporting maritime trades, just not marinas, or do we just want to look like a picturesque postcard maritime industry akin to New York having meat packers in an area with a bunch of hipsters? I mean, but that's what New York decided to do. So I don't know the answer, but I think that we're the solutions that we're coming up to need to have those answers first before they can be good answers.
So Scott, you've been patient.
Yeah, I kind of look at it from the 20,000 foot picture. Some big basics that for instance, in Eastport, the demand for boaters coming from Washington, both on housing, economic shopping centers, were because there were boats and the marinas. And I don't think restaurants are going to save marinas. If you want to see masts and boats, bobbing boats, as Ross said, I think the city needs to look at it from a larger marketing perspective. We've got Annapolis, that's a very historic town, and people come for the history. And you have a maritime town all the way back to the same point in history. And people want to come down to both see boats, but also to participate. And I've seen both angles of it on City Dock and elsewhere and in my business. But there has been a big demand over the years in my career for people coming to live in Annapolis because they could keep their boat there and they could get the services. And I don't think that restaurants are going to save marinas per se, but it may help. And I think Ross alluded to it a little bit in as far as helping with tax reductions or something. If you're a maritime, I hate to call it a subsidy, but you want to have the maritime look, feel, and industry able to be healthy enough that you attract people to come and buy houses, which increases the tax base and demand for different things in the city, and restaurants that aren't on water. People come down there, and I've seen on City Dock specifically, people come down on the weekends, sit on a bench just so they can look out over the water and have coffee, breakfast, or whatever on a Sunday morning. And I'm sure Beth has seen that as well on the City Dock. So there's more to do than just having restaurants subsidizing marinas to keep marinas healthy. And maybe the city needs to give tax breaks, as Ross alluded to maritime businesses that are pure maritime. And I don't have the answer, but I'm just looking at it from a bigger picture than one marina wanting to have a 4,000 square foot restaurant because they're not making money on the boat side of it. And I don't know what the city can do, but maybe it's a tax subsidy, if you want to call it that, but some breaks that they can have that the maritime businesses and the maritime landowners can make a success and longevity of the whole thing.
Well, to that point, Scott, one of the arguments, and this goes back to, I think, not the most recent 20-year plan, but the previous 2 10-year plans, was that in some respects, if you look at it from a zoning and land use perspective, maritime zones downzoned the waterfront, because the highest and best use of waterfront is not, a bunch of boat slips. From an
Depends on what
economic
he
perspective.
wants to have on the waterfront. It can be a Fort Lauderdale, or you can be a.
Well, but my point is, and what has happened, what we learned is that the Department of Assessments and Taxation does not consider marina is being downzoned, they're assessing the value of a marina based upon the $1.4 million house that's sold across the street. And maybe even upcharging it because you're on the water. And there's no distinction, there's not a noticeable distinction in the assessment process, and that's a state level process. It's not something the city controls, but there's no distinction between the $1.4 million house across the street of 8,000 square feet, and you extrapolate that to a marina that's got it got 18,000 square feet, and so you multiply 1.4 million by 3, now you're at 4.2 million. And then
I've been there, Terry.
puts their tax rate on it, and that part of that was what has come out over the past 2 comprehensive plans when there's been discussion before we got to 025-21 that we don't have control over one half of the tax equation. We only have control over the tax rate unless there's some state legislation that says, hey, recognizes that a marina on the waterfront is not the same as a waterfront house or even a house across the street with a water view. So,
As a landowner, I've been in more than once to the appeals process in the state, just for that exact same reason. And others, Debbie may have done it. I don't know, Rod Jacobs done it, but others may have done the same thing for that exact. You hit it right on the head, because they're taxing us like the neighbors that aren't maritime, and it's unfair in a way. And sometimes you get a little bit of a break on it, but maybe it needs to be the state legislation, but I don't know. But it seems to me that it's a little uneven in as far as the way that the assessors are doing it.
all right. There's not any other
Well, let me-
substantive.
Hold on,
Just,
Alan has his hand up, and then Ross.
Oh, okay.
I just
Yeah.
want to speak to Ross's point a little bit because 2 years ago and then here recently, I've been out looking for maritime space for the school. So I've been actively talking to marina owners and bouncing around, and those rates are dear. I mean, we're just, obviously we're a small school, 3 classrooms, and we just can't afford to move. I mean, we're in Annapolis City Marina because they gave us, careful here, they gave us, a really good deal to get us in there. And it was during COVID and we got in. I don't think we would get in today.
Yeah,
And
I think you're right.
so a lot of these, and I don't blame the landowners, I really don't. I can't imagine what their taxes are, but it's for a small business. And then we have, 21 contractors that work with us. Andrew used to be one of them. And so I hear a lot of where their businesses are, where my diesel business is, where my electrical business is, where this, that, and the other is. They would love to be down there, but the rent's just too high. You just can't afford it. And if you want to spread out, then you have to start looking at places outside of Eastport, and you have to start heading down the South River so you can afford to spread out a wee bit. But, we've talked about the rents. They're high, and maybe that's just the way it is. We're in Annapolis. But for a small business, most of them just price us right out.
So that is, the irony is that at the same time, I'm looking somewhat stiff-legged at this initiative. I am sponsoring legislation to open the R4 district uses to allow Capital Sup to operate at Nautilus Point. And the reason I'm doing that is I believe Capital Sup provides water access, and water access is a guiding principle for the city council. This city council, I assume in the future, but it's kind of ironic that Capital Sup, maybe they didn't apply to various marinas, but it does seem like that would be ideally suited to Capital Sup, would be to be located in a marina. I don't know what Nautilus Point is charging them to have the paddle boards and kayaks there. And I don't know whether the legislation will pass. There's a surprising amount of resistance coming to this piece of legislation from across the city. And again, it's that same thing that we don't want to have all of that traffic coming into our residential neighborhood and taking up parking spaces and making noises and so forth. So, there's clearly there are some issues. I think I take it to heart what Seth mentioned about cleaning up. Is maritime only those things that are on the water side? Certainly faucets is not on the water side, and West Marina is not on the water side, and I do consider them to be maritime. Um, Viking was near the water, and faucets was on the water. But in any event, I have discussed this with the mayor briefly, as much as I can get the mayor's attention and and some other colleagues on the council, and we are seriously looking for ways that we can help the marinas with these business taxing districts or some other ways. I know Gavin is trying to bring maritime manufacturing back to the city. He wants the electric ferries to be built probably over in the WMI, but so it's not like people aren't thinking about this and looking at it, but everybody has a self-interest and things that they need to protect their ability to live happily in the Ward 8 environment. So, and I'm in Eastport because that's where my boats were that I was racing and cruising, and that's what attracted me here. I didn't realize there was a lot more to Eastport than just being near Muller Marine, but turns out there is, and something to be protected. Anyway, we've gone long.
At the risk of opening up a Pandora's box of discussion, I will give my one pet peeve, and that is on parking in Eastport and elsewhere in Annapolis. Parking wasn't a problem when everybody had an off-street parking pad or space between the houses. But when they added the addition on the side of their house and took away that parking on their property, and then, by the way, everybody has 2 or 3 cars instead of 1 car, I suggest to people to sometimes look in the mirror and you'll see where the parking problem is. But that's been my mantra for, as Ross knows, for 20 years. But in any event, yes, I think we probably need to move on. I do think, Hope, if you would send that information around. So we've been talking sort of in the abstract, because I don't think many of us have actually read it, but I think we're going to leave it on the agenda and see what comes up.
And I've sent it out, so thank you.
Beth, is there what's the status? I think the last time we talked on moving the mooring fields and doing something about sort of the anchoring in Spa Creek in particular. I think there was the city had gotten a consultant on board and was studying about moving some of the moorings.
So we have contracted with Baylands, and we're working on reconfiguring St. Mary's. Beyond that, that's still like a work in progress. So the St. Mary's field is not productive for the group, just so everyone knows, because the moorings only hold a boat up to 35 feet in length, and industry standard is like much larger than that for folks that want to moor out. So we are probably weeks away from getting their design build for where those moorings would go. It's all funded by grants from DNR. And so we're hoping to reconfigure that mooring field so that we can make that mooring field productive. And so if you don't know, our moorings are something that bring in the most amount of revenue. It's very surprising. It brings in more than the overnight docking.
And is that part of that study, if I remember from earlier discussions, is that some of the moorings that would come out of St. Mary's Cove would actually get moved either farther up Spa Creek and strategically positioned, but is the study also including anything on Back Creek?
No, but we're hoping to do something there as well. But yes, St. Mary's, we're hoping to do only in Spa Creek. And yes, they will have to go outside of St. Mary's in order to accommodate the larger vessels. And we're on the home stretch of that project. I think Andy has a question.
Any movement on any super yacht moorings out in the open river?
No, we don't. I think it's an interesting prospect. I'm interested in delving into that. But you and I should talk offline because our team has entertained that many times and we're not sure who'd be interested. We have wondered if that would be good, especially because we have those small American flagged cruise lines, American cruise lines, like we're not sure who would be interested. So we should talk about that.
But
What are the
also-
biggest moorings that you have now? I mean, what are the boat length limitations on the biggest moorings you have now?
So now it's 55 foot.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we should definitely talk about that. If you have some ideas, I would love to hear them.
Great, thanks.
You start putting super yacht moorings inside of the triangle where the of the shoal marker over to Triton Light in that area, and you're going to impact everything from college sailing, high school sailing, pirate cruises, you name it, that go on in that area, and you're just going to have it. You know, I can see that being a difficult ask.
There are definitely yachts that don't come to Annapolis because the Annapolis City Marina is the only potential spot and it is not available.
Napa City Marina or
I mean,
Yacht
I'm
Basin?
sorry.
Yacht Basin.
Yacht Basin Company, yeah.
Right.
Yacht Basin.
Oh, and I understand that. I just having, you know, the family history being small boat racing off of SSA for high school, college, you know, even down to Opties, and putting moorings for 150-foot boats, yachts in there, just seems counterintuitive. Certainly not neighborhood serving.
And the hope that between Gavin and Stuart Pittman that we could shake loose David Taylor, and that clearly would allow for big boats, but that just hasn't moved off a dime.
It's been 25 years.
Yeah.
Hard to imagine. Beth gave us a brief update on the city dock project. The short version is the demolition and resiliency aspect is moving forward. The approval of the design of the Maritime Welcome Center is under appeal, and meandering. That's been appealed. I don't know who. I'm not sure who appealed it. It doesn't make any difference. It has been appealed. So there's no new start of construction on that until that appeal is resolved. But Beth, am I correct that basically the rest of the project is continuing to move forward?
Yeah, we think so. We have no reason to not believe so. We don't believe that these FEMA grants will be those that could be cut. So we have high hopes that everything's moving forward.
What day of the week is it?
We are talking about a plan B for funding, which is the city really has very little money invested in the city dock. It's coming from elsewhere, the 3P and that sort of thing. And we are very close to having the capital money we need to do the resiliency part of the project for sure. And we may issue general obligation bonds to fill in that void. It doesn't do part B, which is the visitor center, which I prefer to call the Harbor Master Marina facility. But that is a lot less expensive. So if we don't get the FEMA money, we are going to have to move forward with the resiliency. The Annapolis Anne Arundel County Resiliency Authority is a potential source of some other money to supplant the money we're hoping to get from FEMA. And it will move forward. As far as the suit, it was filed by Historic Annapolis, and I'm not sure that the judge issued a stay with that filing. So I think it is only finding the money that is holding up moving forward with the city dock project. You're muted.
I know, I was crushing a water bottle and didn't want to make noise. On
How
to the-
long, okay, how long will we have the lovely row of porta potties at City Dock for the public to use?
I would say it's going to be there for a while, because assuming that we go ahead with the resiliency, we're going to have to start trucking in dirt and things like that. And I don't even understand, there are nicer bathroom facilities that are in more like house trailers that could be done. So I don't know why porta potties, but
Well, I can't make any promises, but I can tell you that I heard that we are investigating a possibility of bringing in trailers with better facilities.
Right.
So I can't make promises, but I did hear that we're working on that. And so I can give the group an update later, but certainly the city is looking at doing something better.
That would be a big help because those are fairly common and fairly available at major events. And I would think that downtown Annapolis would qualify as a major event.
Yeah.
Sure, and I don't want to speak ahead of myself, but I do think we're working on that.
That would be great. The visitor experience isn't too great right now.
No, it's not.
Sure, I hope it's going to be improved shortly.
We've onto the new business, the resiliency update. I already shared with you that Matt Fleming is going to come in May. Scott also mentioned to me that Joe Cater, who some of you know, who's an economist and has done some various maritime studies for the city, and has presented things to our board over the years, has been working, I think, sort of on his own on studying houseboats. Ross, and I didn't know if you were aware of that or not.
I was.
And I'll just leave it at that there's a resource that may be there. I mean, he is a consultant, but there's a resource that may be there that could be tapped into because he's usually pretty thorough in his research that on the issue of houseboats. And I just put it on there more as a placeholder to remind me to mention it in case you, Ross, in particular, had not heard about it, but it was just for everybody else's information.
Do you have a phone number for Joe?
I'm sorry, Scott, what?
Do you have a phone number for Joe?
I do. I can get it to you.
Yeah.
He's
I had Joe under contract in my professional life, a couple of different contracts, and
he's doing this on his own just out of curiosity. He knows what we're looking at, what the city's looking at. And I suggested that he ought to be paid for what he's doing, but that's my personal view. And he's also houseboats and liveaboard. So it's not just houseboats that can't navigate. It's also liveaboards that are living on their, whatever 52 nice boat year round. And he's looking at it nationally in areas like Annapolis and Mid-Atlantic, but on the West Coast and South Coast and in Florida, areas that have these kinds of things and what they've done about them. So he's going to do a study of that. But I'll give you his phone number.
thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of the new business. Is there anything anyone wishes to raise for the good of the cause, other than their hand for a motion to adjourn? Ross?
Well, do you want to report on the first meeting of the Houseboat Task Force?
Oh, I didn't realize we had a report. Yes, I would.
Well, actually, I wonder if that's not the Deputy City Manager, Jackie Giles, is on the thing, but Beth and Tim Jacobs kicked off the first meeting. I thought, Beth, you guys did a good job, and the group got off to a good start, and I'm happy with the
I
people.
got to give Tim all the credit, but yes, I thought it was a good kickoff.
Yeah. And we have a chair and a co-chair. And Rod Jabin is the vice chair of it. I don't know Guy that well, but I've heard good things about him. But
Who's the chair, Ross?
is Guy something?
Guy Carone.
Guy Carone, he's a liveaboard.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good. So we have a liveaboard chair and we have a large marina operator vice chair.
Right.
Okay. Jackie, anything you want to add?
No, except that, this kicked off just this past week, and the first report is due mid-April from this group. So the first report will just be summarizing that we had the first meeting, we outlined what our obligations, responsibilities were, we elected a chair and a vice chair, and that those two gentlemen are consulting as to how we make assignments going forward. Now, before this meeting kicked off, staff did convene from several different departments that are affected, and we did some basic research. The harbor master's staff had already done some research. So there are resources to the task force in almost all city departments to answer the questions, to meet the requests and other directives from the resolution that created the task force. The final report from the task force will be due mid-July to city council. And then according to the resolution that created the task force, we are to disband within 3 months of the report. So the next meeting, we will be making assignments. There'll be some reports on any other information the staff has gathered. And we'll move forward to July.
So Jackie,
So-
does the on the staffing side, does that include, I would assume it includes fire department
It's
representative?
the fire marshal's office is definitely involved because of regulations and code regulations and accessibility to the interior and also of these vessels, as well as what occurs when a fire occurs at a marina. So there's the concern of getting the vessel away from the marina and not catching anything else on fire.
Likewise, is Public Works involved because of you're going to, and I'm not thinking so much in terms of liveaboards, but in terms of, a house barge that's becoming an Airbnb, short-term rental, and the
That's a
infrastructure
planning and
for
zoning.
water, sewer, et cetera.
Right. So the Airbnb and the use of that's a planning and zoning question. So the Department of Planning and Zoning is involved, and the Department of Public Works is involved for the issues that you are identifying. So whether or not these vessels need to be plumbed, hardwired, sanitation concerns as well. So all of those kinds of things, which also connect to the Department of Planning and Zoning, those kinds of requirements. But Public Works has issues that are connected, as does the harbor master. There have been thoughts that the harbor master's pump out boat could be used for these vessels. That is not true. That pump out boat is not designed to pump out that kind of volume, and it is DNR grant funded for recreational boating. So we are supposed to use it for recreational boats, not for houseboats.
All right, you
So Terry,
anticipated all of my questions.
I attended the meeting as a representative of the Maritime Advisory Board. So as stated, the first meeting was to basically introduce everyone and get assignments out. I do think some interesting things. First of all, that everyone on the task force has the contact information of other members. And some interesting things I think came up already. One, given that Ocean City had, I guess, placed a ban on houseboats, there's a lot of interest in the task force in seeing what actually went on in terms of Ocean City's deliberations. And then just in general, all the work that the city has done, the different departments of research, getting that to task force members so that they can get up to speed. So I think those were the takeaways from my standpoint.
Yes, Frida.
So, Jackie, I have a question. What is the reasoning behind the task force not being allowed to accept public comments?
The task force will be able to receive public comment at a certain point. Now, right now, I think Frida, you're kind of referring to public participation, I think, in meetings. Is that where you're really going with that?
No, I was referring to, it appeared that the public is not allowed to submit comments. I know they can't appear before a meeting or whatever, but just not even being able to submit comments to the task force. Is that
Well, Frida,
correct?
you're welcome to do that. You can send them directly to the harbor master, to Beth, to the harbor master's office. So the harbor master, per the resolution, is tasked with leading this group with the assistance of planning and zoning. So if you have comments or information or resources that you think would be useful to this group, we can do that, definitely. And if at some point the chair and the vice chair think it's important and useful to have a public session or take public comments, we can decide to do that as well.
Great, thank you.
It looks like Ross has something to add there.
The emphasis, first of all, I want to give particularly Beth and her staff, but a lot of the city staff have already developed quite a healthy database, and that's already been shared, as Rick said, with the work group. The meetings are virtual, and you can watch them on YouTube. It's a little hard to find on the city's website, but if anybody wants to know how to do that, and they're recorded, so you don't have to watch them live. You can come back. But the principal purpose for this group is information gathering, not opinion making. And so when they have a public meeting, and I think there will the expectation from the council is there'll be at least one meeting that will be an open meeting, yet to be determined by the committee itself. But we would really want to get comments on the information that the council needs to make policy, not comments on whether we like or dislike houseboats or any of those sorts of things. It's very much a fact-finding group. It does have some interesting people on it. Carl Snowden is on there, and representing input from the community at large. And I pretty much already know what Carl is going to say and how I'm going to respond to him when it finally gets to the city council. But the group, most of the people that were nominated showed up, so it was well attended and was well run. And I think the work from the city staff, particularly Harbor Master, has given them a good jump on some of the data needs. The thing you have here about charters and charter rules and so forth is going to be critical, because the marinas that want this don't want it monitored by the harbor master or the short-term rentals monitored by the permits and inspection staff. They want it all monitored by the Coast Guard. And that's just not going to happen, and it's not going to be acceptable.
I mean, what I would say is the Coast Guard's not going to monitor any vessel that's not underway.
Right.
That is 100% certain. And I understand, there may be some information we need to convey, but that won't happen.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have one other item separate from that, but just I saw that ordinance O-9-25, the expanding waterfront uses in R4, had first reader at the city council. And I have a question about it. I mean, in a specific sense, I think it's great if Caps Up has a home for its paddleboard. So I'm not opposed to that. And I see that the legislation was narrowed because it seemed to have expanded to have cafes and other things. But
Yeah.
given all the discussion we've had about the Marine Task Force a couple of years ago in terms of WMI and how to help out the marinas, if you will, this allowing residential areas to offer, space and docking for charter companies and others, it seems kind of contra here. On the one hand, we're worried about marinas, and then we're opening up other areas for what essentially are marina businesses. And so um, I I'm just curious as to the balance there.
I'm not sure there is a balance, and the backstory is that the attorney for Capital Sup and for Nautilus Point is a good friend of the mayor and asked for that big omnibus carte blanche things that I sat down with Chris Jakubiak and the city attorney, and we whittled it down to its current shape. But I chose to take charge of it because I want to try to control it. It's ironic. I had a dialogue today with Alderman Savage and the Office of Law. The Office of Law is not looking very friendly towards this piece of legislation. And I'm saying, hey, let's kill it. I'm doing it because I want to be in control of it, not because I think it's such a great idea. And I do think that it would be better for Capital Sup and any of the other water access and affordable water access and water access to people who visit as well as live here should be at marinas, or at least something that is not residential. So I take your point, Rick, and I will admit that I'm the sponsor of the legislation. But as I said, because I don't want it to get away from me or us.
Yeah, no, I applaud. Actually, I think that was great to narrow down. As I say, I like Capital Sup, so I'd like to see them have a home. I just think it's so contrary. Here we're twisting down in terms of the marinas and giving out these 5% incentives, and yet and it if it's just Cap Sup, I understand, and I understand it has to go before an appeals process for anyone to get approved, but if all of a sudden, many more charter businesses start going to, these residential areas, then again, I think it's just another knock at the marinas and the kind of restrictions that WMI puts on them.
So the way the legislation was proposed by the attorney, it was not only, it was only R4 lots that are 10 acres and more. And there's only one such lot in the city, and
Okay.
that is Nautilus Point, and the
Okay.
attorney represents both of them. So we opened it up, but there's not many R4s. In fact, I was surprised to learn that many of the R4 zones in the city are cemeteries, like the ones right on the Rao Boulevard. I guess that's a perpetual residence is in any event. Yeah, I don't know where it's going to go, and it may not make it through this term, which after that, somebody else's problem.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mike,
Yeah, not to drag it out too much further because but I feel this is a good discussion and Rick raises a really valid point. But part of the discussion around the Maritime, the separation there is the office uses are the places where the marina property owners are struggling. Not a lot of marina property owners struggling with that water space, the slips and the rental of those slips. I'm sure that Alan can speak to that too. The reason that Alan probably has a home at Annapolis City Marina is because he needs classroom space in the building. And if he didn't need the classroom space, he probably would not have the water space there to run the product that he runs out of that marina. It's just, it's so high a commodity. My business, I got incredibly lucky that the Templeton family was willing to see something in me, and I was persistent. And if they didn't give me a slip, I'd probably be operating my boat in the South River. And because we built something successful, we were able to rent space, which now makes me more valuable to the Templetons as property owners. But if I was just running a boat out of a slip with Spa Creek views of the Naval Academy in downtown Annapolis, I doubt I would have been kept around very long. So, the Capital Sup was creative in finding a home at at Nautilus Point, then Watergate. I guess now it's Nautilus Point all the way. But because they had been displaced from what was Ben Sorrell's and Petrini's yacht yard when it redeveloped as South Annapolis Yacht Center, they were there in a marina that not a lot of people wanted to slip their boats at, and not a lot of people wanted to run commercial businesses out of. But as soon as they lost that space, they then end up having to find someplace where they're able to have access to put the paddle boards in the water and all that. And that's really difficult to find a marina owner that is going to rent that space out to a commercial user when they could rent it to a sailboat owner who's going to come twice a year and, and pay the same amount. So it is important to expand that, because Nautilus Point has a place where they can launch where they don't have to take up a slip that's available to a recreational boat owner.
Yeah, Mike, just to be clear, I like that Caps Up is getting a solution. So it's more just that, you know, that we're basically, the way it's written, obviously it's been, as Ross has said, has been trying to be circumscribed as much as possible, but kind of that charter businesses could be run out of residential areas, which it just takes another thing out of the marinas.
Of the potential quiver for a marina owner. I totally agree. Yeah. And that's why I said I didn't want to belabor it or even disagree with you. It's just
Mike, the perspective you just offered us was really what I had hoped would come out of the WME task force, and it is very suggestive of other things that we might want to be thinking about to help the small marinas. I keep my boat at Muller's and Tecumseh, but nobody wants to see the small marinas go away, but we would like them to remain as much as possible small marinas. And Debbie's point earlier on about what goes on inside the buildings. And so I think you just made a very powerful story about maybe where we turn the focus. And I'm sorry, I just heard over and over again, 4,000 square foot restaurant, 4,000 square foot restaurant, and not creative things like the story with you and Pirate Adventures, which is a real success story. And I'd like to see more of those. And it is maritime. I mean, and it gets kids out on the water that might not ever get there. And so, you know, that's the kind of thing that is where we can be creative with the legislation and with the supports for the marinas and the WME.
Yep, 100%.
Andy.
Just as far as the houseboat pressure situation, if the Airbnb aspect of it was off the table, there would be no houseboat issue. And I don't understand why people think it's some kind of a right to have an Airbnb. You can't do that anywhere you want. And when you, Mike, were talking about the community good, I don't see a single bit of community good in Airbnbs. And I don't care how ugly your boat is. The type of boat isn't the problem. As long as it's a boat.
First of all, there is a generic houseboat issue. If they're hard plumbed and hardwired, they're not a boat anymore.
Well, that's ridiculous.
Yes,
it shouldn't be hard plumbed and hardwired.
And if it's hard plumbed and hardwired and there's a fire, how the heck is the fire department going to pull it out of the marina? So the fire spreads to everybody else too. I think there are bigger issues with houseboats, but if the Airbnb issue went away, which would take away the incentive for doing this, those are not cheap properties to buy. And so instead of giving $12,000 a year for a slip, you get $80,000 with a rental property in there, but you take away slips for true recreational boating. Now there are a lot of houseboats in the city already. There's 3 of them in Pier 4 Marina right across from my boat at Tecumseh. So they've been around for a long time. And Lex Brindley made the point, and he made it to this body when he spoke. I don't think the government, the city government or any government should get into the business of telling marinas what kind of boats they can have in the marina. But I think we can tell them things that are life safety issues and also traffic generating parking problems and things like that. And that's where I'm thinking the houseboat study group will have to go in order to address those issues.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Mr.
Thank you.
Fagley,
So much
is there a
fun.
second?
Second.
Mr. Allen, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Aye. Thank you, everybody.